In this lesson, we're going to begin our course and I'm going to show you how you can create the basic layout of your scene or your shot. I'm going to use Unreal 5.3 for this series, but as I said earlier that you can also use the latest version as well. But the problem with the latest version is that sometimes the newer version of Unreal Engine comes in with a lot of bugs and glitches. So it's a good practice to use a stable version over the latest one. Now, even if you do create your project by using 5.3, it doesn't mean that you're stuck with 5.3 forever. Unreal Engine projects are always forwards compatible and you can always open your project in the newer versions of Unreal Engine as well. So I'm going to quickly launch Unreal 5.3 and I'm going to select this tab. Make sure the blank preset is selected as well. And I'm going to find a folder to save this project. I'm going to turn on ray tracing, but I'm going to keep the starter content off because I don't need that. Let's rename the project. I'm going to rename this as Unreal underscore cinematics. So this is the new project that we just created, and as you can see that Unreal Engine has automatically created a level for us. But what I'm going to do is to create my own level from scratch. I'm going to just quickly open this menu and select this level. I'm going to rename this as level underscore 1 and I'm going to open this level. It's going to ask me to first save that level. So I'm going to save it and it's going to open the new level. Okay. And as you can see that in this new level, we don't have anything in our scene. It is just pitch black. Let me delete these two because I don't need them anymore. And now what I'm going to do is to bring in a few lights into the scene because this is just completely blank and I don't think I'm going to be able to see anything if I bring any asset or model into the scene. So what you can do is you can simply go into this add button and you can drag these lights into the scene. But what I'm going to do is to go into window and I'm going to select environment light mixer. This is going to give me all the lights that I need at one place. So I'm just going to quickly add all of them. Create skylight, create atmospheric light, create sky atmosphere, create volumetric route, and create height fog. Okay, I'm gonna close this one. I'm gonna select all these lights and let's move them to a different folder. I'm gonna rename this as environment lights. Okay. Yeah. So now that our scene is lit, what we can do is, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring in a landscape layer in here. The reason why I need a landscape layer in here is because the landscape layer is going to provide a basic surface that we can use to place assets on top. Okay. So what I'm going to do in here is to go into this option, this drop down menu and select landscape. Now, as you can see that this is going to give me the grid of a landscape. It's pretty huge. Okay. And on the left hand side, we have a few options. We can add the material to the surface of the landscape if we want. We can tweak these parameters, location, rotation, and scale as well. We have some other settings as well. But for the most part, the default settings just work fine. So I'm just going to create this landscape. One more thing that I'd like to mention in here is that we're not going to keep this landscape layer throughout our project. We just need this landscape layer to place some assets on top of it. And once we have populated this landscape surface with a few assets like mountains, rocks, and stuff, then we're going to simply just remove this landscape layer once our scene is ready. Okay. And as you can see that we have this landscape in here and we have a very simple brush that we can use to sculpt on this landscape. This is where the landscape layers really come in handy because they're going to allow us to define the bounds of our scene and also gives us the idea how much scene our camera is going to cover. So what I like to do with the landscape layer is that I like to set the boundaries of the scene. Okay. But the problem is that I don't have much of an idea of how big this landscape actually is because we don't have anything for reference in our scene. So what I'm going to do is to bring in a first person character into the scene, which is going to give me a better idea of how big this landscape actually is. So what I'm going to do in here is to go into selection mode and let's bring in a third person character. I'm going to click here and select this option, add feature or content pack. I'm going to select the third person character and add this into the project. Let's close this one. I'm going to go into characters, mannequins, meshes, and I'm going to bring this skeletal mesh into the scene. Okay. Let's reset the position of this one. I'm going to press F to focus on this character and let me bring down my camera speed. There we go. I'm going to bring this up on Z. And as you can see that our landscape is pretty huge as compared to this character. This is where the third person character really comes in handy because it gives us an idea of how big the scene actually is. Of course, you don't necessarily have to bring in this particular character. You can bring any character you want. You just need to make sure that the scaling is right. Proper scaling is very important for this project. If you mess up your scaling, your renders are going to look awful. Okay. So just make sure that your scaling is right, and anything that you bring into your scene as a reference, just make sure that it is properly scaled. Okay. So now that I have a little bit of idea of how big this scene actually is, what I'm going to do is I'm going to head back to the landscape mode to define the boundaries of our scene for our shot. So let's bring the size of the brush down to, let's say, 200. And you can use your left mouse button to sculpt on this landscape surface, okay? Just make sure you don't overkill this because it can be very sensitive. So I'm going to just take some time and just define a little bit of boundary for the scene. And let's extend this boundary to somewhere around here. I'm going to increase the size of this brush to 400. And let's sculpt on this landscape. Yeah, I think this thing looks good. I'm going to do the same thing on this side as well. Something like this. Perhaps this one is a little bit too close. So I'm going to erase this one. You can press and hold shift and your left mouse button to undo the sculpting. But what I'm going to do is to select this flatten tool and choose a flat area on the surface of the landscape. Then simply press the left mouse button to flatten this out. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to go back to the sculpt tool. And maybe I should select this character, bring it somewhere around here. And I'm going to go back into the landscape mode and maybe sculpt somewhere around here. Yeah, I think this looks good. Okay, I'm gonna now go back into the selection mode, and yeah, I think I'm gonna place my character somewhere around here. And then what I'm gonna do is bring in a basic cube, and I'm gonna bring this up, and I'm gonna create a rough outline of the cover that this character is going to take. Okay, maybe place it somewhere around here. Yeah, so this is the cover that our character is going to take. Maybe I should select both of them and bring them somewhere around here, perhaps. Yeah, yeah, I think this looks good. Okay. So the idea is that I'm going to place a camera somewhere around here, just going to focus in this direction. And then I'm going to have my mountains over here. And this character is going to start shooting and run towards the camera. And I'm going to add some assets in here and in here, maybe. and few mountains in the back as well. Yeah, okay. So this is how you create a very rough layout of your scene, of where you're going to place your camera, where you're going to place your character, where you're going to place your background, and all those things. So this is why creating a rough layout is necessary, because otherwise you're just blindly putting your assets all over the place. So a much better idea is to always create a rough layout. Maybe a pen and a paper will work as well. But I think a much better way is to just create a landscape and use the sculpt tool of the landscape to define the boundaries or the bounds of your scene that you're going to use for your shot. Because after defining these bounds and bringing in this character, I have a little bit of idea of where I'm going to put my mountains, which area my camera is going to cover, and where I'm going to put my background assets or foreground assets and all that kind of stuff. So it is very important to define the bounds of your scene. And another upside of defining the bounds or creating a basic layout of your scene is that you have a little bit of idea of where you're going to put your camera. So I'm going to put my camera in here, and now that I know the rough position of my camera, I just only have to design this particular area. I no longer have to design the entire landscape for my shot. So it's always a good practice to create a rough layout of your scene, because not only it gives you a much better idea of what you actually want, but also gives you an idea of the position of your assets.